Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Alton Greaves, and I was born into wealth, but never truly part of it. My family tree is lined with executives, polished holiday cards, and smiles that hide razor blades. My grandfather, Ellis Greaves, was a self-made man. From laying bricks in the Bronx to building Greaves Properties, a billion-dollar real estate empire that changed our family name forever, he was iron-willed, brilliant, and practical. But what he built didn't last the way he intended. Because after he passed, the vultures took over. My father, Stanley Greaves, and his brother, Uncle Clive, inherited the company, and ran it into the ground like two drunk captains steering a ship they didn't know how to sail. My siblings, Devon and Chelsea, were no better. Devon, the self-proclaimed tech entrepreneur who still lived off our father's dwindling trust fund. Chelsea, a glamorous, lifestyle consultant in LA whose followers knew more about her staged brunches than her credit card debt. And then there was me, Alton. The odd one out. The military man. The poor soldier, as they liked to say. I didn't get the fancy cars or the invitations to yacht parties in Cannes. I got eye rolls when I showed up in uniform. Every year, at Christmas, they made sure to remind me who they thought I was, the humble, low-income embarrassment who chose to serve instead of profit. I joined the army at 18. Not because I was lost, but because I needed structure. Because I wanted to serve with honor. And because I didn't want to become like them. I still remember the last real conversation I had with Grandpa before he died. We were on his back porch, overlooking his quiet estate in Hudson Valley. He handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "Build something real, Alton. Don't inherit it. Earn it." He knew. He saw what his sons were becoming. What greed did to blood. I was 16 when he passed. Everything changed after that. My father took control and started bleeding the company dry. Yacht memberships, private jets, shady deals with shady partners. Uncle Clive followed suit. And while the company's stock dropped, our family dinners became more extravagant, more fake, more unbearable. Every Christmas was the same. I'd come home on leave. Quiet. Reserved. They'd all be dressed like magazine covers, sipping champagne flown in from France, laughing about IPOs and NFTs they barely understood. And they'd mock me. Every time. "Alton. You still fixing Humvees for a living? Don't worry, big bro, maybe next year we'll all pitch in and buy you a real suit." "You can't blame him," Chelsea would say, "he's just so grounded. And broke." And every time, I swallowed it. I kept my head down, smiled politely, and left early. But I wasn't broke. They never asked. Never cared to. Because while they burned through money like it was air, I was building. Quietly. Privately. Strategically. I read every finance book I could get my hands on. I invested my army's salary wisely, first in index funds, then in undervalued stocks, then in real estate. And I never told a soul. Not when I crossed my first million. Not when I bought my third apartment building under an LLC. Not even when I bought a 48-acre lot in upstate New York and developed it into a thriving suburban neighborhood. They still thought I was poor. They still thought I was nobody. And I let them. Until this Christmas. When they pushed too far. The invitation came like it always did, an email from my mother with a subject line that said, "Greaves Family Christmas, Mandatory." She still acted like the matriarch, even though she divorced my father years ago and remarried a hedge fund manager in Switzerland. I almost didn't go. But something in me said this was the year. The year I'd show them, not tell them, who I really was. What I had really become. I arrived in a black rental car, nothing flashy, just clean and professional. Dressed in my old wool coat, combat boots, and a navy blue sweater. They were already gathered at the estate's new temporary location, a rented penthouse in Manhattan's financial district, since the Greaves mansion had been sold off quietly last year to pay off legal fees. They didn't know I knew that. I stepped out of the elevator to the smell of overpriced candles and the sound of Devon bragging about a tech partnership that was clearly fake. The moment I walked in, the room fell half silent. "Hey! Look who made it out of the barracks." Devon grinned, raising a glass. "The conquering war hero. Does that coat come with medals or just memories?" Chelsea quipped, barely looking up from her phone. "Come in, son," my father said, his voice thick with scotch and ego. "Try not to embarrass us this year." I nodded. Sat down. Played the role. But my patience was running on fumes. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that penthouse knew, was that just last month, I finalized the purchase of the very building they were now renting from. I was now their landlord. I owned the penthouse. I had signed the contract 2 days before Thanksgiving. And that night, at the very dinner where they called me a poor soldier, once again, I had the original deed in my pocket. I just hadn't decided when to pull it out yet. I sat there that night, quietly chewing a bite of overpriced roast duck as my family laughed at my expense, again. Devon leaned in with his usual smugness, swirling the bourbon in his glass like it was an Olympic sport. "So, Alton, tell us about your exciting military career. Still fixing trucks and doing push-ups in the rain?" I smiled, barely. "Still leading my unit. Logistics and advanced training now." "Oh, logistics," Chelsea said, raising her eyebrows like she was impressed. "That sounds thrilling." She turned to our cousin Lauren and whispered, not low enough, "Probably still lives in a shoebox next to a barracks." The others chuckled. I wasn't angry. Not really. I was numb. Because this wasn't new. This had been my life since I was a teenager, the outsider in a family that worshipped wealth and mocked humility. My own father never once said he was proud of me for serving. Never once asked how I was doing. All he ever wanted was for me to quit the military, rebrand myself, and join Devon's failed startup or Chelsea's fake PR firm. I used to walk away. Let it go. But this time was different. Not because their jokes hurt anymore. But because deep down, something inside me broke. Not in a way that shattered me, but in a way that freed me. I looked around the penthouse. The gleaming marble floors. The rented antique chandeliers. The bottles of wine they could barely afford. The forced laughter. The carefully posed smiles. This wasn't a home. This was a stage. And every actor here was desperate to be the lead. They didn't know the rent on this building was overdue. They didn't know the owner, the one who could throw them out without blinking, was sitting right there, holding a fork and listening to their mockery. But what crushed me most wasn't what they said. It was remembering who wasn't there. My grandfather. My grandmother. The only 2 people who ever saw me. When I was a boy, Grandpa used to sit me on the porch and talk about business, about discipline, about patience. "The world will laugh at you when you plant seeds," he once said. "But they'll beg to sit in your shade when the tree finally grows." He was right. But God, it had taken years. The pain of being dismissed, ignored, forgotten, it never went away. Even when my portfolio hit 8 figures. Even when I started buying up pieces of the very empire they destroyed. Because part of me still wanted them to say, "You did good, Alton." But that night, watching them pose for pictures in a penthouse I owned, I knew they never would. They couldn't. Because admitting my success meant admitting their failure. That was the moment the despair settled in, not because I hadn't succeeded, but because I realized something far more painful. They would never change. No amount of kindness, patience, or humility would make them see me differently. I would always be the poor soldier. Because if I wasn't, their whole identity would collapse. That truth hit me like a weight in my chest. I felt hollow. Like the little boy I used to be was sitting beside me, quietly hoping his father would finally say, "I'm proud of you." But the only words my father spoke that night were, "You still haven't figured it out, son. Life's about power, not pride." He lifted his glass to staying on top. Chelsea laughed. Devon clinked his drink. And I just sat there, frozen. That was the moment I stopped hoping. The moment I accepted that I didn't need their approval anymore. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to walk away this time. I was going to show them, without shouting, without bragging, what power built through patience actually looked like. And I was going to do it my way. They wouldn't see it coming. Because they never see anything outside their bubble of vanity and lies. But I would make sure the truth hit them so hard it knocked the delusion out of their mouths. All I had to do, was wait for the right moment. And trust me. That moment was coming. When I left that Christmas dinner, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I nodded, set my glass on the marble table, and walked out of the penthouse without a word. The elevator doors closed behind me, and as the soft jazz of the lobby returned, I felt the silence wrap around me like armor. But in my coat pocket, something burned against my side, the folder. Inside it, the final, signed deed to the Tribeca high-rise my entire family was living in. I bought it through a silent holding company. The Greaves name didn't appear anywhere. I didn't want them to know until it was too late. And it all started with one phone call 2 months earlier. "Mr. Greaves," my agent said, "we've got an asset you may want to see. A distressed luxury property with tenants who, let's just say, overestimate their status." The moment I saw the address, I almost dropped my phone. 146 Cedar Point, Tribeca. My father's building. Uncle Clive's too. The same place Chelsea was now broadcasting her fake life from, pretending it was all hers. They didn't own their units. They rented, lavishly, yes, but the developer was deep in debt and trying to liquidate fast. I acted faster. Within 3 weeks, I'd assembled a shell trust, transferred funds, and signed the first offer. My lawyer warned me, "This is going to hit them hard, Alton." "Are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm not buying this to hurt them," I said. "I'm buying it to reclaim the values they destroyed." Once the ink dried, I didn't tell anyone. I waited. I studied the leases. They were all up for renewal at the end of January, perfect timing. But the real twist didn't hit me until I found an old tenant registry buried in the purchase paperwork. Unit 30A, Stanley Greaves, lease co-signed with Clive Greaves. Unit 30B, Devon Greaves, with monthly rent extensions. Unit 30C, Chelsea Greaves, paid via 2 credit cards on rotation. That's when it hit me, they weren't just leasing, they were barely hanging on. Chelsea's payments were always late. Devon had missed November entirely. My father had used Clive's name to negotiate a rent deferral. They weren't mocking me from a throne. They were pretending, playing house in a kingdom they didn't own, surrounded by fake jewels and hollow walls. That knowledge should have satisfied me. But it didn't. Because knowing the truth wasn't enough. They needed to feel it. And I knew exactly how. I called the building manager, Tom. We'd spoken a few times since the deal closed, but now it was time to get specific. "I want to increase the rent for units 30A, 30B, and 30C by 100%. No exemptions, no negotiations." Tom paused. "That's gonna cause a riot." "I'm aware," I said. "Mail the notices January 2nd. Hand delivered. Sealed and stamped." "And if they call you?" he asked. I smiled. "Tell them the new owner said, 'Welcome to reality.'" The next day, I drafted one more document, my own statement, sealed in an envelope. It read. To Stanley, Clive, Devon, and Chelsea. For years, you laughed at the poor soldier. Now, you pay rent to him. Alton Greaves. I didn't want to gloat. But I wanted them to know. To feel that shift in power, that poetic sting of discovering they'd been bowing to the very man they ridiculed. I slipped the envelope inside the folder next to the deed. And waited. January came. And so did the day. On January 3rd, my phone lit up. Chelsea was the first to call. I let it ring. Then Devon. Then my father. Voicemail after voicemail, increasingly frantic, increasingly angry. What the hell is going on with our leases? Did you know someone raised our rent? Double? Are you behind this? Alton, pick up the damn phone, this is a mistake, right? I sat at my kitchen table, sipping black coffee in my tiny Virginia apartment, watching the sun pour through cracked blinds. It wasn't a mistake. It was earned. And they were about to learn the truth the hard way. When the calls started pouring in, I didn't pick up. Not because I was trying to be cold, but because I'd finally learned something my grandfather tried to teach me. The most powerful words are the ones you never have to say. Let them feel the silence. Let them stew in the confusion. I knew exactly what would happen next, and I was right. The following Monday, Tom, my building manager, texted me. Your family just booked a meeting with leasing. Trying to negotiate terms. Want me to handle it? I typed back quickly. No negotiations. Let them squirm. Tom was a professional. He didn't ask questions. He knew this was personal. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just going to raise the rent, I was going to make sure they had nowhere left to hide. I went back through the building's paperwork and made a full list. My father's unit. Already in arrears. Uncle Clive's. A co-signer, but not on the lease, completely unprotected. Chelsea. 2 months behind, using maxed-out cards to delay eviction notices. Devon. The lease was on a month-to-month basis. One notice, and he was out. It was surgical. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to deliver the final cut. But that wasn't enough for me. This wasn't just about money or rent. This was about legacy. About what they'd done to the Greaves name. About the way they'd taken my grandfather's empire, his values, his grit, and trampled on it like it was their playground. So, I called my lawyer. I want to begin acquisition talks, I said. Of what? He asked. Greaves International. What's left of it? He paused. You want the company back? I don't want the company, I said, I want to restore it. Greaves International had been reduced to a shell, most of its assets sold off, its reputation damaged by scandal and mismanagement. But a few key stakeholders still held pieces. And those people? They remembered my grandfather. One of them was an old friend of his, Ms. Nora Levine. We met in a small cafe near Battery Park. She was in her 80s but sharp as glass. You look just like him, she said when I walked in. Except maybe a little sadder. I smiled. I carry his weight. She nodded slowly. I heard about what your father did to the company. He came to me once, begging for a loan. I laughed in his face. That made me grin for real. I want to buy back the shares, I told her. Every last one. Piece by piece. Quietly. She studied me for a long moment, then said. I'll sell you mine. Not for the money. But because he would have wanted this. She slid an envelope across the table. You've got 1 year, she added. Prove to the board that the Greaves name still means something. I left that cafe with more than documents. I left with fire in my chest. And as I walked past the skyscrapers that lined lower Manhattan, I made a vow. I would rebuild what they destroyed. I would reclaim every last piece of it. But first, I had one last message to deliver. One final moment that would bring everything full circle. Because the family still thought I was just lucky enough to be behind the rent increase. They still didn't know I owned the entire building. And they were going to find out, together. In person. At one final dinner. I sent the invitations through Tom. Printed in gold foil, on heavyweight cardstock. Greaves Family Appreciation Dinner. Location, 146 Cedar Point, Rooftop Lounge. Time, 7 p.m. Attire, formal. Host, property owner. I knew they'd come. They couldn't resist anything that looked elite. Anything that hinted at power or wealth. They thought it was some new investor. Maybe a foreign buyer. Maybe a chance to weasel into something profitable. But it was just me. The poor soldier. Planning his final move. The rooftop lounge at 146 Cedar Point was pristine. Warm golden lighting. Imported marble tables. Waiters in black vests gliding through the room with flutes of champagne. A string quartet played softly near the edge of the glass railing, with the Manhattan skyline glowing behind them. Everything was perfect, just like they liked it. But tonight, they weren't the ones in control. I was. I arrived early, wearing a tailored navy blue suit. No rank pins, no boots. Just a quiet, confident presence. Not flashy, intentional. Tom greeted me at the entrance. They're all coming. Dressed to kill. Let them, I said. This dinner will bury the old Greaves for good. At 7:03 p.m., they arrived. Like clockwork. Chelsea, first, draped in designer knockoffs and hunger for attention. She air-kissed everyone in the lobby, phone already out, live streaming, an exclusive private investor party. Devon strolled in next, loud and laughing, slapping backs and name-dropping venture capitalists he probably read about on Twitter. My father arrived last. Stanley Greaves. The self-made parasite of his father's empire. He walked in like he owned the building, unaware that the man he'd called a disappointment his whole life now owned the roof beneath his polished shoes. Tom ushered them to the head table, where their names were printed on elegant place cards. Each card had a small gold seal embossed with the letters AGG, my initials. They didn't notice. Or maybe they didn't care. Too busy basking in what they thought was their next big opportunity. Do you know who the investor is? Devon asked the waiter. Not sure, sir, the waiter said. He prefers to remain private. God, I hope he's foreign, Chelsea whispered to Clive. Maybe Dubai rich. They toasted to possibilities. My father looked around the room like a lion waiting to pounce. This could be our way back, he murmured. Let's not screw it up. I stood behind a velvet partition, listening. Waiting. When the moment felt right, I walked out. No announcement. No spotlight. Just presence. The string quartet stopped. Every head turned. Chelsea blinked twice, unsure. Devon's smile froze. Uncle Clive squinted. And my father stood up slowly, eyes narrowing. Alton, he said, voice sharp. What the hell are you doing here? I smiled. Walked to the table. Placed a folder in front of him. Something I wanted to show you. He opened it slowly. First, the deed. Then the floor plans. Then the tenant lease summary, with every unit they occupied listed by name, and signed under the ownership of AG Holdings. He looked up, eyes wide. You. I own the building, I said calmly. Have for 2 months. The silence was nuclear. Devon's jaw dropped. Chelsea gasped audibly. Clive's hands began to shake. And my father went pale. You raised our rent. I did. You set this up. I did. Why? I looked him square in the eyes. Because for years, you taught me that power was about appearances. About control. About humiliation. You mocked me. All of you did. Called me the poor soldier, like I wasn't worth your time. I leaned in slightly. But I didn't need your time. I needed my own. The room was dead silent now. All eyes on me. All illusions cracked. I let the truth soak in like acid. You laughed at me for living modestly, I continued. For serving something greater than myself. But while you spent, I invested. While you mocked, I studied. While you sank, I rose. Devon tried to stand. This is insane. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said, this makes me free from you. Then I reached into my coat pocket. Pulled out one more envelope. Laid it on the table. This is your notice, I said. Rent doubles next month. No extensions. No negotiations. Unless you start paying like every other tenant. My father's voice cracked. You'd throw out your own family. You threw out everything this family was supposed to stand for, I said. I turned to Chelsea. To fake followers. To Devon. To empty promises. To Clive. To cowardice. And finally, to my father. To entitlement. I stood tall. Lifted my glass. To the real Greaves legacy, the one built, not borrowed. And walked out. No applause. No confrontation. Just the sound of a family empire finally realizing it had fallen. I thought they'd scream. Threaten. Maybe even lunge at me. But when I walked off that rooftop, leaving the folder and truth behind, they didn't chase me. They couldn't. Because for the first time in their lives, they had nothing left to say. I took the elevator to the lobby, past the doorman who now worked under my contract, and stepped into the cold Manhattan air. My breath fogged in front of me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but release. For years, I'd dreamed of a moment like this. But I never imagined it would feel like this. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just, done. But I should have known the Greaves wouldn't go quietly. The next morning, the storm hit. Voicemails. Emails. Texts. All of them. Devon. You don't understand what you've done. You embarrassed Dad. You ruined us. Chelsea. You've always been jealous of us. Is this your revenge fantasy? Grow up. Clive didn't even bother with words. He sent his lawyer after me. A cease and desist for emotional damages and abuse of landlord power. And my father? He didn't say anything. Not directly. Instead, he made one final move. I got a call from my lawyer at 3 p.m. that afternoon. Alton, she said slowly, I just received a copy of a lawsuit from your father's legal team. He's filed for a forced property audit. Claims your purchase of the Tribeca complex was unethical because of familial manipulation. I laughed. For the first time all day. Let him file, I said. The records are clean. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came in the next sentence. There's more, she said. He also filed a claim to block you from acquiring Greaves International. That stopped me. What? He's arguing that since he still retains his last 4% stake, he has veto rights on any future acquisition of majority control unless unanimously approved. I was silent. He knew. He'd found out about my quiet buyback of shares. And he was trying to stop it. This wasn't just about rent anymore. This was about legacy. My grandfather's company. The Greaves name. The one thing I was trying to rebuild with integrity. My father didn't care about restoring it. He just didn't want me to. Because me succeeding meant admitting everything he stood for had failed. And he'd burn it all before letting that happen. I stared out the window of my apartment that night, gripping the mug of coffee in my hand like a lifeline. He'd always been like this. Never a builder, only a taker. I thought I could show him. Teach him. Inspire something. But he'd rather destroy the last piece of our name than let me take it back. And then I remembered something Grandpa once said when I was a kid. Sometimes, the only way to save a legacy, is to start a new one. I didn't need Greaves International. I didn't need their approval. So I changed my plan. I called Ms. Nora Levine the next morning. Tear up the transfer documents, I said. I don't want it anymore. She was stunned. You're walking away. No, I said, I'm building forward. Not digging through ashes. That same week, I filed incorporation papers for a brand new venture. Ellis and Evelyn Holdings. Named after my grandparents. Built on new values. Built on everything they taught me, not what my father and his brother twisted. It would do what Greaves International failed to do, invest in real people, real communities, and real innovation. I transferred my properties into the new entity. And then, with quiet satisfaction, I issued eviction notices to every member of my family still in Tribeca. They had 60 days to vacate. Chelsea cried on Instagram. Devin called me a sociopath. My father didn't say a word. But Clive? Clive showed up in person. I was walking into the building for a site inspection when I saw him waiting at the front desk. He looked smaller than I remembered. Takes guts to throw out your own blood, he said bitterly. I didn't flinch. Takes rot to think I wouldn't. He sighed. You were always the quiet one. But you're cold, Alton. No, I said, stepping past him. I'm just done pretending. And I meant it. The day they moved out of the Tribeca building was gray and cold. Chelsea went first. A moving company packed her dozens of fake designer bags and overpriced furniture into a rented truck. She didn't look at the staff. She didn't look at me. Just kept her sunglasses on and her phone camera pointed away from her real life. Devin came next, fuming. He slammed his car door so hard the side mirror snapped back. You think this makes you better than us? He growled, blocking my path in the lobby. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because he knew. He stormed out with nothing but a suitcase and a wounded ego. Uncle Clive followed, unshaven, broke, grumbling something about legal loopholes as he passed the front desk. But there were none left to find. He was lucky I didn't sue him for fraud on one of his past schemes. Lucky I had more restraint than he deserved. And my father? He was last. I watched from the 12th floor window as he stepped into the cold with 2 suitcases, alone. No driver. No entourage. Just a tired man in a long black coat who finally realized the empire he built on arrogance and denial had crumbled completely. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. He knew who had taken the last piece of power from him. Me. The poor soldier. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. After they left, I stood in the now empty rooftop lounge, the same one where they toasted their fake future. The same one where I handed them their reckoning. It was quiet now. Peaceful. Mine. But more importantly, it was earned. I'd gone from the overlooked youngest son to the man who reclaimed everything they wasted, and chose not to become like them. That's when I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Stamford. Back to my grandmother's old house. It was run down now, weather-beaten, boarded windows, but I still had the keys. I stepped inside and walked through every room, breathing in the dust, the silence, the truth. And then I climbed the creaky old stairs to the roof. The same rooftop where she and I used to sit on cool evenings, sipping tea, wrapped in blankets, staring at stars while she told me, Alton, you were born with their name, but you don't have to die with their choices. She was right. I hadn't. I pulled a folded letter from my coat pocket, yellowed with age. Her handwriting still delicate and strong. Let this money grow through your wisdom and principles. But never forget why you were given it. I had. And I would keep building, not just buildings, but foundations. Today, I'm the CEO of Ellis and Evelyn Holdings, a real estate and investment firm that prioritizes education, veteran housing, and community development. I still live simply. Still drive a used truck. Still serve in the Army Reserve. But now, I also fund scholarship programs for young cadets, build affordable housing for single mothers, and restore historical properties in neglected neighborhoods. My grandfather's name means something again, not because of what I inherited, but because of what I chose to carry. As for my family, Chelsea moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn. Her Instagram is quiet now, just vague captions about resetting and spiritual journeys. Devin works at a mid-level agency in Jersey City. No more flashy startups. No more borrowed cars. Clive disappeared to Florida. Probably conning someone else. And my father? He lives in a small rented condo outside Hartford. Alone. He doesn't speak to me anymore. That's okay. He taught me everything I needed, by showing me what not to be. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret it. If I regret cutting them off. If I regret making them face the truth. But I don't. Because truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. And the truth is, I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I just stopped letting them use my silence to survive. I built something better. Not out of hate. But out of honor. Honor for the people who believed in me when no one else did. Honor for the name they tried to bury. Honor for myself. And now, I sit under the same stars I once stared at as a boy, tea in hand, rooftop beneath me, and I smile. Not because they finally saw my worth. But because I never needed them to. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.